It is so good to have you here. Thanks for being on. And let me just tell you a little bit about myself, and then we will jump into the topic. But it's great to see all of you here. Feel free to turn your cameras on, by the way. It's nice to be able to see people. It's still not as good as being in the room with you, but I love that I can see at least one person who might laugh at my occasional attempt at a joke. I'm the president and co-founder of Equal Rights Institute, and we are a pro-life organization that's trying to help pro-life people to be more like Jesus. So I am very interested in the question, what would it look like if Jesus talked to a pro-choice person? Like, what would his body language be like? What kinds of questions would he ask? What kinds of questions would he not ask? What would it sound like? Would he made arguments that are grounded in truth, but spoken with gentleness and reverence? And so we do lots of speaking and writing. We've got podcasts and articles and some online courses and a YouTube channel. And it's all about trying to help pro-life people in the areas of practical dialogue tips. So what are the nitty-gritty things that we've learned through the process of going through about 5,000 face-to-face conversations? Like, how do you make those conversations to go well? How do you bring people's defenses down so they can hear the things that you have to say? We talk about relational apologetics, the art of cultivating friendships with people who are different from you, and seeing people change their minds through that context. And we also talk about apologetics and philosophy. What are the best pro-life arguments? There are some pro-life arguments that are bad. There are some pro-life arguments that are logically true, but not very persuasive to today's pro-choice activists. And then there are some arguments that are actually both true and persuasive. And that is what we're talking about today. When we go onto college campuses, that's like our lab. We're testing out arguments to find out what works. I've got a Google Doc, a secret Google Doc, or a private Google Doc, like just full of ideas of things that I want to try more often, so I can find out whether they work or not. And sometimes we try things that fail miserably, and then sometimes we try things that work really, really well. And today's talk is about the argument that is kind of the best example of that, an argument that we now call the most persuasive pro-life argument, because we've been testing it now across the country for years and years, and we have never seen any single argument change more minds about abortion on the spot. Like, when people connect the dots on this, it is very rhetorically effective at helping them to see kind of the pro-life position. And so I'm going to talk you through that argument, and then we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A. So I really hope that you've got lots of questions. I would love to spend my time kind of answering whatever questions you have about pro-life or pro-choice arguments or dialogue or relational apologetics. I would love to talk about that. But I'll probably do maybe 15 minutes or 20 minutes on this argument to give you something before we jump into Q&A. So one of the greatest responsibilities we have as pro-life advocates is to make a convincing argument for the value of the unborn child's life. We need to help others understand how the human embryo deserves the same protection as you and I. And while there are different valid ways to argue this fundamental belief of the pro-life position, some approaches are more persuasive than others. And at ERI, we use the equal rights argument because in our real-life conversations, it is much more convincing than every other personhood argument we have ever tested and tried. Before I explain how to make the equal rights argument, I want to talk about when you should use it in your conversations. And so sometimes we'll use this technique called that a lot of pro-life apologists call trotting out a toddler, where you'll compare their argument for abortion to killing a toddler. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to show that the difference between you and the pro-choice person is not that, like, they're the only one that cares about poverty, or they're the only one who cares about women who have been mistreated, like all these different things. Like, no, we all agree on that. We probably disagree about whether the unborn is a person with rights or not. And so comparing their argument to killing a toddler is kind of a way to do that. And if the person responds with something like, well, the toddler is a person, but the embryo isn't, but the unborn doesn't have rights like a toddler does, this is a great time to make the equal rights argument. Basically, anytime you understand the other person to believe that abortion is okay because the fetus isn't a full person like you or me, then the equal rights argument is the next place that you want to go. On the other hand, if you hear the other person justifying abortion based on bodily rights, or maybe even after admitting that the unborn is a person, then it's not a good idea to use the equal rights argument because it's not going to address what that person is actually thinking. That said, conversations often start with bodily rights and move to personhood and maybe back and forth. And so pay attention to what they're saying, because they could move to personhood arguments and you'd want to switch what you're talking about too. So you can make the equal rights argument clearly and persuasively by learning the following 4 steps. So if you are note takers, then I'm going to call out the places where you're going to want to take notes, because I have a new 4-step process that we are now using to teach the equal rights argument, just to make it even more easy for people to master, because I really want you to be able to use this argument. I don't want you to just know that people like me know how to use the argument. I want you to be able to use this with their pro-choice friends in your sphere of influence. So step 1 is to step away from abortion. Step 1 is to step away from abortion. That probably sounds like a weird thing to do in a conversation about abortion, but it's actually going to help you change their mind, because it shows them that they think differently about abortion than every other issue. It's also likely to make them more comfortable if they're feeling intense, because now you're going to talk about something that they probably feel very passionate about: equality. Now, it's important to ask permission from the other person to take a short break from talking about abortion so that you can understand how they think about rights more generally. You don't want them to think that you're dodging the question, right? So when I say it, it sounds something like this. I'll say something like, can we put abortion on the shelf for a minute so I can understand how you think about rights more generally? We'll come back to abortion in a moment. And then I'm going to ask them if they think equality is important. And specifically, I'm going to ask about the right to life or protection from violence. The way that I usually say this is, do you think it's important for people to have equal protection from violence? The word violence is very, I think, rhetorically helpful in this context. There's different ways you could ask about, do you believe in equal rights for all people or something like that? So if they say yes, which they probably will, then you want to point out that you agree. It's going to build valuable common ground. Common ground is awesome. They're expecting that there's going to be no common ground between pro-life and pro-choice people, especially in 2020, the way people are talking about politics right now. So anytime you can find common ground, do that. It's going to really help the conversation. It's going to help when you're talking about the things that you actually disagree about. So point out the common ground and explain that you believe equality is really important. And whenever people's rights are not equally protected, you recognize that there is some sort of injustice that is going on against those people. So to emphasize the importance of thinking carefully about equal rights, you can talk about historical injustices stemming from bad thinking about equal rights. For example, you could say, I think it's important to think about equal rights because there have been instances in history when people have been wrongly excluded from equal rights based on things like race, gender, religion, or disability. So that was step 1. You're stepping away from abortion. Step 2 is to sort who is in and who is out. You're going to sort who is in and who is out of the equal right to life community. So in order to do that, we need to set up this concept of the equal right to life community in our conversation. So start by introducing the idea of an equal right to life circle. All right. The idea of the equal right circle is that everyone inside of this circle has an equal right to life, and everyone outside does not. Even if things outside the circle should have some rights or some protections, they don't have the same right to life as things inside the circle. So you could say something like, let's imagine that there's a big circle and everyone inside this circle is in the equal right to life community. Everyone inside the circle deserves to be equally protected from violence or being killed. Sometimes when we're on campus, we'll actually point to like a square in the sidewalk, and that'll become our equal rights square. And we'll kind of hop in and out of it with different examples. You can also use the idea of like a room. What if there was this room where the particular property or quality that gets you access to the room, that gives you an equal right to life, kind of like a key card. We did this in an animated video that we made earlier this year with Karen. It's kind of a PragerU kind of a video. The critical thing is to make clear that it is an equal rights circle. It's not a circle where some things have different levels of value. Okay, it's not a circle of valuable things. So I'll keep using the idea of a circle today, since that's what I do most often on campus. So you need to ask them who they think should be included in that community by providing different examples of living things to include or exclude. So you want to start with some obvious examples of people that are in, and then ask about things you believe should not be included. So we're going to start from obvious cases and then move to less obvious cases, which is a pretty common way for philosophers to try to work something out. So in this step, you're going to use their own intuition to sort through examples that are obvious to almost everyone. And this is going to build the foundation for what comes next. So I always start with a group of people who I think should be the most obvious to pretty much everyone, human adults. If I can't get the person I'm talking with to agree that I have an equal right to life, then I'm probably not going to feel as emotionally safe in that dialogue. Okay. So, like, in all seriousness, I'm intentionally starting with obvious cases and I'm going to slightly less obvious examples. We're not going to get far if we don't have common ground about human adults. So I start with myself and the person I'm talking to. And then I ask about adults distinguished by different characteristics like height, ethnicity, sex, disability status, things like that. And I'm going to give them time to answer each question about different groups of people who should be obviously equally protected from violence. Make sure to acknowledge that you agree with them when they say yes. You can also at this point make a joke. So as a quick tangent, I think it's really important when possible to use humor in your dialogues. It's not something that people are expecting, but it can really help bring people's defenses down. It can show you like you're just like a normal human and you're trying to make light of certain things. So there's kind of an opportunity for a joke here. You could ask about equal rights for like a hated celebrity. You could be like, what about Nickelback? Like, should they be in after all the music that they've made? Like that kind of thing. You could pick on a sports team rival or people who wear socks with sandals, whatever. Like you just like there's kind of an opportunity for a little bit of kind of playfulness here, which can be helpful to the dialogue. It seems silly to add this question, but it can really lighten a heavy conversation so they can hear your argument in the future. So from adults, I move on to newborns. Now, some people might try to exclude newborns, especially if they've taken an intro to philosophy class and have bought into utilitarianism. Usually, though, people will agree pretty quickly that newborns should be included in that equal right to life circle. Okay, so we've talked about adults, we've talked about newborns. The last thing I'm going to want to make sure that I get a chance to ask about are squirrels. This one might seem funny to ask about. So I'll usually say something like, okay, this might seem like a weird one to ask about, but what about squirrels? Should we include them in the equal right to life community? And no matter how much of an animal lover the other person is, it's pretty obvious that killing a squirrel isn't the same kind of wrong as killing a human. And so they'll usually exclude squirrels. And just like with newborns, some people will give the wrong answer on squirrels. And they might do this because they feel like giving the answers they really believe will make it hard to justify being pro-choice. This is called biting the bullet. If we kind of if people run out of questions, I'd be happy to go further into like, how do you deal with people who bite bullets like that or just being very stubborn? Since most people don't do that, I'm just going to move on for the sake of time. But one more tip before I go to step 3. We're intentionally asking about the most obvious cases in this step. Like we could ask about tougher cases like dolphins, chimps, or Vulcans, and we're certainly willing to talk about any case the pro-choice person brings up. But I think it's generally most helpful at this point in the dialogue to stick to the more straightforward cases. Given that, we also don't bring up people in comas or elderly people at this point because you might accidentally transition this into a dialogue about assisted suicide and or euthanasia. And those are important issues too. But know that given the opportunity, many pro-choice students will jump at the chance to debate pro-lifers about that because frankly, they feel more confident about being pro-assisted suicide than they are about being pro-choice. Now time for step 3. We have stepped away from abortion. We've sorted with them who is in and who is out, focusing on adults, newborns, and squirrels. And now we need to do step 3, which is to solve for X. We are going to solve for X. We need to figure out why some living things are in and others are out. There's got to be something that people who get in have, which things that don't lack. So in this step, you're going to work with a person to whom you're talking to solve for X. So here's how I might set this up in a real conversation. I might say, there must be a reason why some things are in the equal right to life community and some things are out. So let's call the thing that gives you entry X. What do you think it could be? One thing we already know about X is that it cannot be something on a spectrum that some people in the circle have more of than others. It has to be something that we all have equally if it's going to explain why we have the equal right to life. So if someone said, oh, Josh, I think the reason that the things in the equal rights list, I would like the reason that humans are equal is because they're all intelligent. It's like, that's not going to do the job of explaining equality, right? Why? Because some people think better than others. Intelligence is not a thing that all humans have equally. And if you don't believe me, then later today, I want you to go to YouTube and I want you to click on a random political video and read the comments. And you will see that some people think better than others. They all have an equal right to life because intelligence is not the thing that gives you equality. So I'm all for protecting them. I'm just saying intelligence isn't the kind of answer we're looking for. We're looking for an answer that's going to be something that you just either have or you don't have. Okay. So after this, you want to listen to the answer or answers that the other person provides. If they preempt this by asking you for your answer, then feel free to give it to them up front. But you're still going to want to work through theirs afterward. I'll get to how I explain my answer when I get to step 4. But I'm going to help them test their answers against the facts that we have already agreed on during our sorting process. If they give an answer that excludes human adults or newborns or includes squirrels, then there's a problem with their answer. So usually that problem will come in the form of newborns or squirrels. And as my friend Trent Horn says, pro-choice definitions of personhood either include too many things, like squirrels, or they exclude too many things, like newborns. So I'm going to give them time to work through this puzzle, helping them test their answers. People will be more likely to change their mind if they are allowed to work through it on their own. And remember, based on what you both agreed on from the sorting process, their answer needs to include adult humans. It needs to include newborn humans, but it should exclude squirrels because we've agreed that squirrels don't have an equal right to life with humans. So I'll give you kind of a couple of examples of common ones that come up. So what if someone said you need to have self-awareness? Okay, this is a common one that philosophers bring up. And I'll just, for the sake of the example, define that as having the ability to reflect on one's own existence at all. So they might say, once you're self-aware, then we can't kill you. We can't abort you. But until you're self-aware, you're not a valuable person yet with any rights. And I kind of understand why people would think this. After all, when I reflect on my own existence, one of the things that I value most is my self-awareness. So naturally, some philosophers believe that it is a necessary condition of personhood. So I'm going to think I ask kind of as a rubric in my head, would that include adults? Well, in this case, yes, adults are self-aware. Would it include newborns? Well, no. Newborns are not self-aware. You're not probably self-aware, the level of like the kind of self-aware that philosophers are talking about until something like 18 months after birth. And so that's going to be a big problem for their view. What if they say sentience? You need to be sentient. This is a word that gets thrown around sometimes. And usually when pro-choice people use that term, what they mean is a very basic form of consciousness, like the minimal ability to perceive the world around them. Okay, well, I'm going to ask myself, well, would that include adults? Well, yes, of course, adults are sentient. What about infants? Yeah. But would that exclude squirrels? No. Squirrels are clearly sentient. I mean, they store food for the winter, right? I was actually just reading about this recently. I learned something cool. I was gonna let you in on it. There's something cool about squirrels. So eastern gray and eastern fox squirrels, they don't just store their food all in one place. They actually bury caches of food scattered all over a 7-acre area to better protect it. And they memorize where those hiding places are. And then they only go out to them when they like have to, when they need to eat. So yeah, squirrels are way sentient. Okay. So then that leads us to step 4, which is to share your solution. So we've stepped away from abortion. We've sorted with them who is in and who is out, focusing on adults, newborns, and squirrels. We've solved for X, helping them test their answers to see if they have a squirrel or a newborn problem. And in case they haven't asked yet, it is time to do step 4, which is to share your solution. This is how it would sound like. This is how it sounds like when I do it. I say something like, I think the only answer that works with what we already know from our sorting process is something like human nature. It is the only thing that everyone in the community shares equally. So to bring abortion back into it, that is why I think embryos should be protected from violence. They have that same thing that the rest of us in the community share. So I think they must they must be included. And a really quick note, and this is a little bit philosophical, but the phrase human nature is a philosophical term. It's different from biological humanness. It's different than like just having human DNA. At ERI, we teach our students to say something like human nature, which grants you access to the circle, but we don't think it is precisely human nature. So this might sound confusing, but we actually think it is best to keep the answer intentionally vague so we can help them think about equality without getting into complicated philosophy about persons. This is different. If I'm talking to a philosopher, I will go straight to the very precise answer. But with most people, it actually screws up the conversation. They're not ready to swim in waters that deep, and it's just going to mess with the conversation. So I give them this intentionally vague answer or something like human nature, and they're like, okay, and like they kind of get it. So here I'm just going to review real quick, and then we can jump into Q&A. I know this is kind of philosophical, but again, this is the most persuasive pro-life argument we've ever used by far, and so I want you to learn it. So we covered a lot of material. Step one is to step away from abortion. You want to ask the other person if you can talk about something other than abortion and come back to it. Then ask if they think equality is important, specifically the equal right to life, and make sure to acknowledge common ground here. Step two is to sort who is in and who is out. And you want to use the equal rights circle to talk through obvious cases of what things do and don't have an equal right to life. And the main things you definitely want to cover are various human adults and human newborns and squirrels. You want to at least cover those three examples. Then step three is to solve for X. Ask what it is that accounts for why some things are in and some are out. Be prepared to explain why their answers have problems. Almost every answer you hear will include squirrels or exclude newborns, and you want to point out those problems. And then finally, step four is to share your solution. Tell them what you believe accounts for the equal right to life, something like our human nature. Show that this gives the right answer for adults, babies, and squirrels. And finally, bring it back to abortion. And so that this would apply to unborn humans as well as born ones. And the result is that abortion violates the right to life of a member of the equal rights community. Okay, let's stop there. And I'm interested in finding out if we have questions already. I've got places we can go if there aren't questions yet, but if there are questions, I just want to jump straight into that, okay?
Okay, so go ahead and you can go to the chat, and where it says ask me a question, you can put the questions in the chat and we'll read them. I have one already for you.
Great.
So it says, do more men or women switch their pro-abortion stance for this equal right argument that you just shared?
That is such an interesting question. That is not something that we've attempted to measure. Probably because, and so like just generally speaking, we are very cautious in the way that we talk about our tests on college campuses, because it's nothing like a scientific study. There's no like blind test going on or anything like that. Like it's a lot of anecdotal evidence, and anecdotal evidence only goes so far. We have a lot of it. We've got like 5,000 tests, but still it's anecdotal. And so it's going to like that would actually end up depending partially on who stops at our table more often. I would say women stop at our table who are pro-choice more often than pro-choice men, but not by like a huge majority. Probably by, this is totally off the top of my head, I'd say like by like as like 70% are probably women and 30% are guys who are pro-choice that stop to talk to us. And so right there, that's enough of a difference that it would throw off any answer that I give you. I definitely have talked to people who are both men and women who have changed their mind about abortion, but the stories that stick in my mind the most, for whatever reason, are women. And I'll give you one example of that as kind of people are kind of thinking about questions, but this is just a really kind of cool story. It's a lot more cool if everyone's mics are unmuted and you can laugh at, so it ends really cool, but whatever. I was going to do this on Zoom and deal with the awkward silence. But I was doing outreach in Washington, D.C. several years ago. I just trained the staff at Students for Life of America, and we went out to do an outreach for a half a day, and I would kind of watch them have dialogues and then give them some extra tips and coaching. And but at one point I ended up talking to someone. So we set up a pool table, which is basically like just like a fold out table with a big sign on it. It's kind of like two pieces of poster board that are kind of taped together to just kind of stand on its own. And I'll have a big question on it. In this case, it said, should abortion remain legal? And we had a yes option and a no option and an it depends option in the middle. And it's just kind of like, it's not again, this is not a real poll. This is just like, I'm trying to lure people in, come have a conversation with me kind of a thing, you know? And so this woman, an adult woman who's probably, you know, early to mid 30s, stops to talk to us, still wearing her McDonald's uniform. She literally was walking from work and she sees our thing and decides to come and talk to us. And so we get into this conversation. It just happened to be, she started talking to me. It would have been like awkward to like pass her off to one of the other the staff. And so I just end up in this conversation that like everyone else is just kind of watching. And we talked for probably like 40 minutes. And it was a really great conversation. And I was doing my best in the conversation to show that I was relaxed. So this is like a quick, like a body language thing. So like my favorite, way to position my body in a dialogue is I like to actually be sitting on the table. To kind of like leaning on it or just completely sitting on the table. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I'm a kind of a tall guy. I'm not like super tall, but I'm like 6'2". So I'm taller than the average guy, and I'm certainly taller than most of the women that I talk to. And there's this obnoxious thing that tall guys do sometimes where they will like lord their height over short women. Like they're like too close and it's like, they're super tall. It's almost like this rhetorical thing. It's like, dude, like, it's just like obnoxious. And so like sitting on the table is my attempt to like get as close to like even eye lines so that it's not like I'm trying to act as if my height matters, and just also shows that I'm relaxed. Like I'm not freaked out. Oh my gosh, I'm talking to a pro-choice person. Like it's gonna be okay. It's gonna be fine. So in this case, I couldn't sit on the table because I was already behind it, and there's this concrete wall behind me. It's like a metro station, and so I ended up like leaning like my hands like this on the sign to kind of show that I'm relaxed. Well, the problem was I wasn't. It was all fake, because if you put any pressure on this flimsy sign, it would have just like collapsed. And so I'm just like, my core is getting this workout for like 40 minutes, but like I looked relaxed. And so like we're having this great dialogue, and I used the equal rights argument 3 times before she finally connected the dots, right? And then she did, and her eyes widened, and she's like, oh my gosh, I think you're right. Right? Like, oh, yeah, I've changed my mind. Now, at this point, I was super distracted because I knew I had a plane to catch soon. And I knew I needed to like debrief with the students I was mentoring real quick and catch an Uber. And so I had to kind of like fairly quickly kind of graciously try to end the conversation. So I said, it's been so good talking to you. I have loved this. You're awesome. But I'm sorry, I actually kind of have to go because there's these students and they're all like watching from like 10 feet away, you know. I've got to kind of talk to them. I've been training them, and then I've got to catch a flight. And she's like, what have you been training them to do? And I was like, well, this, you know, what we're doing, like pro-life and pro-choice people having good conversations. And she was like, really? And she walks straight over to them and gives them a spontaneous speech. She's like, you should all talk about abortion. You should listen to this guy. He's awesome. Do whatever he says. This has been great. I've loved this conversation. Like he made me feel so relaxed because he looked relaxed. I love his body language, and I love the kinds of questions that he asks. And this was great. And my life has changed now because I've been pro-choice, but I've been really afraid. I've been like wanting to not have an abortion. And so I've not been sleeping with my husband because I've been afraid of getting pregnant. And now I'm pro-life now, and I'm not afraid of getting pregnant. So I'm going to go sleep with my husband. As he left, Like that was it. It was crazy. Okay. So like her life was changed. So in his too. And so like all that to say, like some people will have to hear it kind of multiple times to get it. But man, yeah, the times that are like in my head are examples like her, where like her life has changed and one conversation because of the equal rights argument. And we've got dozens and dozens and dozens of stories like that.
Thank you. Okay, their questions are rolling in.
Yes, good.
Some say an embryo is a lump of cells. How do you argue that this has human nature?
Yeah, great question. So this is a case where I would respond a little bit and say, like, I feel like this is a bit overly dehumanizing language. Like at a technical level, we're all clumps of cells. I'm just a bigger clump of cells, with more of them than an embryo, but like I'm valuable. And so like I don't think our value has to do with how many cells we have. I think that's pretty dehumanizing language. My question is there something different about this particular clump of cells that means that it is not human right now, or it doesn't have human nature right now, but we'll get it later? Like if a woman doesn't have an abortion, like at some point, does it just get like what, like an injection of value all of a sudden? Like that seems weirder to me than to think that your value as a person begins as soon as you begin to exist. As soon as you're a unique living human organism, you have value, and it's equal value, and that explains why we're all passionate about equality. Like that makes sense of why we want racial equality and all these different things, because it doesn't matter the clumps of cells you have or your skin color or whatever. Like what matters is the kind of thing you are, and I don't see an important difference between embryos and newborns. But if you can think of one, I would love to hear it. Like come back at me, help me out, and I'd invite them to come back and maybe make a better pro-choice argument. Like maybe they say, all right, well, I just like it's not self-aware, so, or it's not viable or whatever. Like okay, yeah, I hear a lot of people say that, and like, and now we can talk about that.
All right, thank you. Your next one. How do you directly address the my body, my choice argument?
Oh, it's a great question. It is like one of the toughest pro-choice arguments. So, there's multiple versions. So here's the thing. I've got a whole, how many questions do we have right now? Because I've got an hour-long lecture on bodily rights.
A lot.
Okay, so then I'm going to give a relatively short answer, and I'll point you to where you can go for more resources. But so bodily autonomy arguments is the other big category of pro-choice arguments. So there's two big disagreements between pro-life and pro-choice people. One is the one that we talked about today, personhood. And then the other one is bodily autonomy. And the way that these arguments work is they kind of say, even if pro-lifers are right that it's a person, she should have the right to an abortion anyway, because it would be like a government overreach to force her to be hooked up to someone else, or she should be able to do whatever she wants with her own body, something like that. There's a lot of different ways that the argument gets made. And so it's trickier in a lot of ways. And so there's so many things I have to say about this argument, but I'll just give, I'll give two quick, like here are two things that work a lot. The first move I always make is to point out that this is an inherently extremist argument. Young people, there's been psychological research on this recently. It's really interesting. Young people generally do not want to be thought of as extremists on either end of the political spectrum. And so bodily rights arguments are inherently an extremist argument. So I'm going to point that out. Here's why. If the way that you're grounding your pro-choice views is she has the right to unplug from this baby, or she should have the right to do whatever she wants with anything inside of her body, then she cannot be opposed to any abortions. Like she can't be opposed to elective 8-month abortions. Like I'm just going to have an abortion at 8 months because we just finally had an ultrasound and we found out that it's a girl. We really wanted a boy, so we're having an abortion now. Like most pro-choice people would be against that. They would say that should be illegal. That is so messed up. But you don't get to have that view and also ground your pro-choice views, and she can do whatever she wants with anything inside of her body. Because where's the baby at 8 months? It's still in her body. And so they have probably internally contradictory beliefs. And I'm going to point that out and say, it seems like you've got to make a choice. Are you going to use this bodily rights kind of argument, and in that case, you got to accept all the abortions? Or do you want to kind of maintain this idea that maybe some abortions are wrong and change your argument? Like you could make that work by saying you're only a person once you can feel pain. Well, then that would work. That would make sense why you'd be for first trimester abortions, but not abortions after like 20 weeks when we know babies can feel pain. Like that would make sense. But you don't get to say you're against nine-month abortions and then say she can do whatever she wants, or her body, her choice. Like, well, then it is her body, her choice at that point. And a lot of people will just instantly jump away from bodily rights arguments because they don't want to be seen as extremists. So that's the first thing I do. One other thing I do that does not cover every version of this argument, but it covers a lot of them, is something that we call the responsibility objection. And so there's kind of this important, you know what? Never mind. I take it back. I'm not going to go here because it would take too long and it's getting too philosophical. I'd have to get into the violinist argument. Let's just go to the next question. Here, I'm going to point you to a website, a web page, or maybe if I post things in the chat, can people copy and paste? Would that work? Can everyone see the chat?
Oh, hold on. I'd have to change it.
Oh, no, maybe not.
Yeah. So just
maybe do that. And I'll just, because I can just like grab these links really fast.
Okay.
But I'm going to grab a link that's got a bunch of resources on bodily rights arguments. It's a really important topic. It's my favorite lecture to do on college campuses because we can get pro-life and pro-choice people there and be like, we're going to talk about the best pro-choice arguments ever and not straw man them, that kind of thing. So I've got some articles and videos. Okay, I'm posting. So I've got like a landing page that we've made that has some articles and some videos about it. And there's even more in the apologetics course that we sell. So, okay, next question.
All right, thank you. How do you directly address the, oh wait, we did that one, sorry. Do you ever use abortion videos in arguing pro-life?
Oh, that is a good question. Okay, I'm gonna go grab a link. I've got a good article about this, but the short answer is that we kind of have a middle of the road position a little bit on this, and I have a lot of experience of doing both. I've done a lot of outreaches in front of large graphic abortion signs, like 18-foot tall abortion signs. I've done that a lot, and I've also done a ton of outreaches with no graphic signs. So I've gotten to experience both, which is kind of rare. Usually pro-lifers are really into one or the other and won't experience both. So where we have landed is, and we have a lot of respect for I have a lot of friends who use abortion images, and I just posted in the chat an article that we wrote on this. But we don't use abortion images on signs. We do have them in our outreach brochure. So we bring these brochures with us, and that brochure has multiple pages. We've got one page with just fetal development pictures, nothing graphic. We use that all the time. And then we have a middle section that has 5 pictures of first trimester abortion. That's graphic. And then we have a third page that we can go to if necessary with one very, very graphic late-term abortion picture. Our general view is that, in fact, our motto is every conversation is a series of difficult judgment calls amidst prayer without ceasing. So we don't believe that any one method is going to be helpful for every single person on every single day. It depends on the person. And a lot of people, sadly, and I think more now than it used to be, are not convinced by abortion images. And there are multiple reasons for that. But I think it tends to just make people not want to talk to you. And the abortion sign on its own isn't as good as the arguments against abortion that I can make. So I want to draw people in and get their defenses down and make it feel to them like we're friends at Starbucks having coffee. And I can do that through my body language, through the kinds of questions I'm asking, the kinds of questions I'm not asking. And then in the conversation, if I feel like they would be really helped by seeing an abortion image, I can ask them permission. So we use them all the time, but we use them with consent. I'm going to say something like, I want to make sure that we're on the same page, that we're talking about the same thing. Would it be okay if I showed you a non-photoshopped picture, an accurate picture of what abortion looks like, to make sure that we're thinking about the same thing? And they will usually say yes, because who wants to be like, no, I want to hide from the truth? Like, no one does that. I mean, it's pretty rare. And so then they will see it. And when they see those images, then after giving permission, they really see them. They're not like instinctively reacting like, how dare you, you violated me, or being distracted by, oh my gosh, there might be women who are post-abortive or who have had miscarriages that are seeing these images, and I'm really worried about their situation, they just stare at it and they see it, and we don't interrupt. We wait for them to speak next. Sometimes they need to stare at that thing for 20 seconds. And that is a very, very important moment for them. So we do believe abortion images are valuable, but we don't think that it is most helpful for people to see them without consent. We think that we want them to really, really see it. And so it's a big debate in the pro-life movement. There are some pro-life people that vehemently disagree with me and are very, very upset that we wrote that article that I posted in the chat. So you should go read it. It's really good.
All right. Is it common for people to say that abortion depends on, what do pro-abortion people usually think? What do they think?
Can you rephrase the or say the question again? I didn't follow that.
Is it common for people to say that abortion depends?
If it's right.
Yeah.
Oh, so abortion's okay sometimes, but it doesn't. Sometimes it kind of depends on her. Oh, absolutely, all the time. You know, the most common thing that we hear on college campuses is, I'm personally pro-life. I wouldn't personally have an abortion, but I would never force someone else to not have an abortion. Like, we call that the standard pro-choice position. So certainly, like, there'll be a lot of people that be like, I'm against late-term abortions, but if it's the first trimester, I'm okay with it. Or I don't think abortion should be used as birth control, but I think if she's really poor or if she's been raped or like something like that, then I'm for that. So like, absolutely, like that's most people. Most pro-choice people are not extremists, and they would think that some abortions should be against the law. Like, this is like, in fact, before you all got brought in, like we were talking about how, like, it is true that the majority of Americans think that there should be more restrictions on abortion than there currently are. Well, that's true because most pro-choice people have a kind of it depends view, and what it depends on varies wildly. But generally, certainly, there's a lot of kind of different views. Pro-choice people have very, very many different views about exactly when they think an abortion is okay and when it's not.
Okay, let me see if I can make this one clear. Should government do something about abortion, such as changing laws, that kind of stuff? Or should Christians be the one that changes people's hearts one at a time?
Oh, that is a great question. I think that we should try and walk and chew gum at the same time. So I think we are not going to make abortion illegal real soon, even though Amy Coney Barrett is basically practically at this point like a Supreme Court. Like it's just a matter of time. I don't think, and I think a lot of pro-life people disagree with me. I don't think we're about to overturn Roe. If you watch the way the current Supreme Court thinks about Supreme Court precedent, although you'll usually hear them use the phrase stare decisis for that, I don't think that they're going to overturn Roe soon. And frankly, the fact that a majority of Americans believe that first trimester abortion ought to be legal is a big hindrance. And so I think we have a lot of culture work. As Christians, have a lot of culture work to do to convince people that that they should be more pro-life. And if we do that, I think it becomes more likely that the laws change. So the way that I think about it is I think of like, you've got laws and you've got culture, and I think of them as kind of like two like metal balls that are attached with like a rope, and they kind of tug and pull each other. It's not usually just one or the other. You can sometimes like work on passing incremental bills in states, and that forces certain kinds of conversations that are really valuable, and then culture tips a bit. During the partial birth abortion debate in the 90s, you saw the biggest swing from pro-choice to pro-life people, because finally people were talking on the news about what abortion actually does to a baby. So there is a legal a change being attempted, and it affected culture, and then the law went through eventually. So like this kind of happens. And right now, I just think that we have a lot of culture work to do before we will probably see abortion become illegal. I do think that abortion should be illegal, even though I do not think that every immoral thing should be against the law. Okay, I think there are a lot of things that are wrong that shouldn't be illegal. I'm generally a small government kind of guy. But I think that the kinds of things where we are seriously hurting innocent, vulnerable people, those certainly should be against the law. So like, we shouldn't make assault legal. Like, I think we should keep assault as something that is illegal, and we will prosecute you if you do that, so we can protect people from having that done to them. So if that's true, then abortion, I think, should be illegal. I just don't expect it to happen real soon. We have a lot of work to do, pro-life movement.
Would you recommend an incremental approach for pro-life argument?
To pro-life argument. Yeah, so I was just talking about this with someone. I mean, so I'm sure it's asked it. I think that's the first time someone's actually asked it in that way. It's interesting. That's why I'm thinking. So I want it, like, it's very important, I think, to be transparent in your conversation. So like, I would never, if someone asked, do you think abortion should be legal in the case of rape? Like, hoping I'm going to say, no, I have an exception. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to say, no, here's what my view is and here's why, and try to help them to see where I'm coming from. So I think that's really important. But certainly, like, early in the conversation, I'm asking about common ground type stuff. I'm asking about late term abortions. I'm asking about sex selective abortions, where we abort girls because they're girls, because I'm hoping to find common ground, and that common ground is going to help the conversation to go better. If I'm in a relational apologetic situation where I've got the opportunity to talk multiple times with the same person, then I am more incremental. And I'm not trying as hard to get them from point A to point Z in one conversation, because frankly, most people can't. Most people cannot change their mind about a serious topic in one conversation. It happens. About every outreach we have on a campus, about one person becomes pro-life on average. So it happens, but those are the exceptions, not the norms. And so I want to give people time. Most people change their minds slowly, the way water changes the contours of a rock, as my friend John Fincher said. And so that's why I really, really love trying to inspire people to, you should have a pro-choice friend. If you don't have pro-choice friends, that's a problem. Like, you are in probably confirmation bias land, and all your friends are a bunch of other, Christian middle-class white people, like, that's not good. You should have friends outside of who are different than you. And that is just a healthy thing to do. And if you have pro-choice friends, it's going to be a lot easier for you to change their mind than it will be for a stranger on a college campus. And so in that case, yeah, I'm incremental. I take my time. I play the long game. I want them to feel safe talking to me. I want them to feel like it's good for us to be open-minded and reasonable and thoughtful. And I'm going to tell them anytime they teach me something, or they make me think, or like, man, I've got to think about that for a while. It was really interesting. Let's talk about that again in a couple of weeks, like that kind of thing.
Okay, how effective was the movie Unplanned?
More effective than I thought it would be. So I'm a very nitpicky Christian when I watch Christian movies. Okay, so I am really, and especially in the last year, I've learned a lot about filmmaking, about cameras, about lighting. I had to set all of this up because at some point we're just going to realize, if we're going to make a bunch of great YouTube videos, we're going to have to buy equipment and learn how to use. I kind of put myself through film school basically on YouTube. And as I learn more about the art of filmmaking, the more frustrated I am, like, pretty much anytime Christians attempt to make a movie, because we're really bad at it on a lot of levels. And Unplanned is another mediocre movie at an artistic level. It is really bad writing. It's horrible lighting. It's really bad acting. There's a lot of problems with it that people like me gets very frustrated. But I'm so glad that there's a lot of people that don't care so much about that. Or I'm sort of glad. I'm glad there are people that can like look past it. It's kind of like the worship. Like, I'm a musician. I turned down a professional music career to do pro-life work. So I've been playing on worship teams since I was like 11. So there's like that. So there's a blessing and a curse. I cannot not hear the problems if I'm visiting a church and there's a problem on the stage. Like, I just know it. That helps me to be a more effective worship team member. It's kind of like this. I'm glad that there's some people that can look past that. Having said that, as nitpicky as I can get about a lot of the bad stuff in Unplanned, I have talked to like at least a half a dozen pro-life people who were personally pro-life, but not passionately, like they weren't doing anything about abortion until they saw Unplanned. And it changed everything for them. And they're like, we've got to do something, man. This is horrible. And now they're like active. Now they're like doing 40 days for life, or they're sidewalk counseling, or they're working with other Christians in the community and getting churches connected so they can fight abortion more effectively. And it's like, you know what? It is so cool that people are different and that God can use anything. to bring people together and get them involved. So it's a bad movie about an important story that has happily gotten a lot of people involved in the pro-life movement.
All right, so we have about 10 minutes left, maybe? Yeah.
Cool.
All right, so when repeating your argument, should we vary it or use exact same language and examples?
Oh, that is such a good question. I love that. I think we should vary it. Sometimes it's a certain word choices will be helpful to people. And so like we teach people to rephrase what they said a lot. It's kind of like when you're listening to them talk, you want it, like our minds kind of do Google Translate automatically when we're listening to people. We are rewording what they're saying and kind of categorizing them in our own head the way it makes sense to us. And so that's why sometimes we'll even accidentally strawman them. We just sometimes mistranslate what they said, or maybe they said it unclearly, or both. And so rephrasing what we hear them saying is a good way to kind of inoculate yourself from that. I might be like, let me tell you what I feel like I hear you saying, but correct me if I get any of this wrong. And they'll try to put their main view in my own words. And then they can be like, yeah, it's pretty good, except for this one thing. I was like, cool, I'm really glad that we got that worked out. I don't want to strawman them. Or you attack a dumber argument than their actual argument. So there's kind of this thing that you can do where you're in this case, you're rephrasing what you say. Where it's like just sometimes like, and I did that with the woman with the McDonald's uniform. I didn't use the exact same phrasing every time I made the equal rights argument to her. I used different phrasing and sometimes sentences that I hadn't said before. And at some point, just one of those clicked with her in a way that my first couple of attempts didn't. And part of that might not have just been the rephrasing. Part of that might have just been she needed time and to become more comfortable with me and more open-minded, or have some of her pro-choice arguments dealt with that were really important to her, and that happened too. Like there's a lot of things going on at the same time. But yeah, absolutely. If you've got the skill to make the same kind of an argument multiple ways, do that. I will also sometimes just use alternative arguments. I've talked to people where the equal rights argument's not working on them. And so I'll try a different pro-life argument that's not as good, but is interesting, and see if that works. And sometimes that will work on them. I don't have time to give you examples, but I will do that too.
All right, let's see if you can answer this one in 5 minutes. How do you effectively transition between a pro-life argument and then sharing the gospel?
Oh, man. I have an article for this. Hang on, let me find this. Here it is. Okay, so I'm going to link to an article that Jacob on our team wrote that is a really good, just like he just tells a story of how he did that. I don't do it in every conversation, especially on a college campus. I think it's a lot to try to get someone to be pro-life and like on their knees in humility before Christ and the cross in one day. That's like a lot. And so I actually see the abortion or the pro-life argument as a pre-evangelistic thing. I'm going to help them to see that the Christian worldview makes a lot of sense about this one topic. And in the process, hopefully show them that I'm thoughtful, that I'm virtuous. Like I don't hate women. That's not why I'm pro-life, that kind of thing. And by the time we do that for a while, they're going to start wondering, well, gee, if he's so smart, why does he believe in this book that was written 2,000 years ago by old guys that heard voices in their head? Like, that seems weird. So then they might ask about that. And then I'm happy to answer it. I'll be like, oh, there's this guy 2,000 years ago. I think he walked out of his own tomb. Like, I think that's a thing. I think that's a real historical event. And if that's true, if he walked out of his own tomb, then I think that guy gets benefit of the doubt points on everything else he said. And so like I can kind of work from there. I'm kind of basically starting with the case for the resurrection, and I'm kind of moving from there. But I don't try to do that in every single conversation. Again, every conversation is a series of difficult judgment calls amidst prayer without ceasing. So every time I'm talking to someone, I'm trying to figure out how I can love them best on that day. Sometimes the best, and I'm trying to figure that out like with my intuitions through the Holy Spirit. And sometimes I think the best way I can love someone is to make a good pro-life argument. I'm happy to do that. There are other times where it seems like, no, I think what this person really needs is a good presentation of the gospel in a non-Christianese kind of a way. And I'm happy to do that. I've talked to other people where, frankly, what they needed that day was just for a pro-life man for the first time to hear them. And I will say almost nothing in that entire conversation, because that's what they needed that day, because a pro-life person never really listened to them before. and that's what they needed. And so I'm making judgment calls just based on the person. But if I were to try to transition in my last 60 seconds here, then what I might say something like, I think in the end, what we're seeing here is that human life is really valuable. And there's something important about that. It's really, really wrong to take that life. And I think in the end, that if we want to go deeper, you want to get closer to my metaphysical basement, like I think the way to make the most sense of why it's wrong to kill people is by figuring out, like, well, where does that value come from? And I don't think that value just comes from evolution or from, you know, an atheistic kind of philosophy. Like, I know people like Sam Harris try to accomplish that. I just don't think that they succeed. I think if we are valuable, then someone made us valuable. Someone with the kind of power to bestow value on people. And so like, as a Christian, I believe that God did that. What do you think about that? Have you ever thought about God and just kind of see where they're at?
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for being here today. We just appreciated it. I learned so much. I'm sure many of you do have those 4 steps, something for our tool belt to use. And we just really appreciate that. So for my guests that are here today, thank you for attending. You can go back to the main page to choose your next session. Josh did put some links in there. Kind of click on those and get those, because once this session ends, the chat will go away and you won't have those. So make sure you click on them, copy, paste, and get those. And again, thank you so much, Josh.
God bless everyone. Thanks for coming.